Today is sorry, the mic is just a bit glitch. Today is the anniversary of the Titanic, and I'm going to read it to you. So yeah, Titanic, British luxury passenger liner that sunk on April 14th to 15, 1912. During its maiden voyage en route to New York City from Southampton, England, killing about 1,500 sea researchers know Titanic passengers and ship personnel. One of the most famous tragedies in modern history, it inspired numerous stories, several films, and a musical, and has been the subject of much scholarship and scientific speculation. In the early 1900s, when the transatlantic passenger trade was highly profitable and competitive, with ship lines finding, I don't know, to transport wealthy travelers and immigrants. Two of the chief lines were White Stars and Cunard. Didn't know that. By the summer of 1907, Cunard seemed poised to increase its share of the market with the debut of two new ships, the Lusitania and the Mauritania, which were scheduled to enter service later that year. The two passenger liners were garner much attention for their expected speed. Both would later set speed records crossing the Atlantic Ocean. Looking to answer his rival, White Star chairman J. Bruce Imsay reportedly met with William Peary, who controlled the Belfast shipbuilding from Holland and Wolff, which constructed most of White Star's vessels. The two men divided a plan to build a class of large liners that would be known for their comfort instead of their speed. It was eventually decided that the three vessels would be constructed: the Olympic, the Titanic, and the Britannic. On March 31st, 1909, some 3 months after work began on the Olympic, the keel was laid for the Titanic. The two ships were built side by side in a specially constructed gantry that could communicate their unprecedented size. The sister ships were largely designed by Thomas Andrews of Holland and Wolff. If you don't know who Thomas Andrew is, uh, he is a build instructor of the three ships, and he was on board the Titanic on his way to New York, and all of a sudden, if you guys see the movie, he decided to not sacrifice himself. He decided to uh have his last moment of the Titanic and say goodbye to Olympic and Britannic, I think. And he you guys know the rest. That he died under going down. Uh in addition to ornate decorations, the Titanic feature was in a first class dining saloon, 4 elevators, and a swimming pool. Its second-class accommodation were comparable to first-class features on other ships, and its third-class offerings, although modest, were still noted for their relative comfort. As to safety elements, the Titanic has 16 compartments that included doors which could be closed for the bridge so that water could be contained in the event the hull was breached. Although they were presumed to be watertight, the bulkheads were not capped at the top. The shipbuilders claimed that the shipbuilders claimed that four of the compartments could be flooded without endangering the liner's Barney. Uh, the system led many to claim that the Titanic was unsinkable. Well, actually, she is. Full completion of the hull and main superstructure, the Titanic was launched on May 31st, 1911. It then began the fit-out phase as machinery was loaded into the ship and interior work began. After the Olympics made footage in June 1911, slight changes were made to the Titanic's design. In early April 1912, the Titanic went under sea trial, after which the ship was declared seaworthy. As it prepared to embark on its maiden voyage, the Titanic was one of the largest and most unpolluted ships in the world. It had a gross registered tonnage. Example carrying capacity of 46,328 tons, and when fully laden, the ship displaced weight more than 52,000 tons. Titanic was approximately 882.5 feet, 269 meters long, about 92.5 feet, 28.2 meters wide at its widest point. So this is where the Titanic took off on the 10th of April and on its way when it sank right here. On April 10, 1912, the Titanic set sail on its maiden voyage, traveling from Southampton, England to New York City. Nicknamed the Millionaire's Special. That was a nice fit in that. The ship was fittingly captained by Edward John Smith, who was known as the Millionaire's Captain because of his popularity with wealthy passengers. Indeed, on board were a number of prominent people, including American businessman Benjamin Guggenheim, British journalist William Thomas Stead, and Macy's department store co-worker Isidore Stretches and his wife Ida. Oh! Oh. In addition, Ismay and Andrews were also traveling on the Titanic. Sophie, I think that story is real when Isidore agreed to let his wife stay with him. Like, I think she says we'll be together 40 or 50 years. I have no idea. I didn't pay attention on deleted scene of the Titanic 1997. My bad. Sophie, SMA has no choice but get on a lifeboat because I think he's scared of water. And everyone looked at him like guilty. Like, that messed up. That was really messed up. The voltage nearly began with a collision, however, when suction for the Titanic caused the docked New York to swing into the giant inner's path. After an hour of maneuverings to prevent the accident, the Titanic was underway. On the evening of April 10, the ship stopped at Shrewsbury, France. The city's dock was too small to accommodate the Titanic's so passengers had to be ferried to and from the ship intenders. Among those boarding were John Jacob Astor and his pregnant second wife, Madeline and Molly Brown. After some 2 hours, the Titanic resumed its journey. On the morning of April 11th, the liner made its last scheduled stop in Europe at Queenstown, Cuba, Cuba Island. That's a hard name. At approximately 1:30 p.m., the ship set sail for New York City. On board were some 2,200 people, especially 1,300 of who were passengers. Throughout most of the voyage, the wireless radio operators on the Titanic, Jack Phillips and Howard Bride, have been receiving iceberg warnings, most of which were passed along to the bridge. The two men worked for the Marconi Company, and much of their job was relaying passengers' messages. On the evening of April 14th, the Titanic began to approach an area known to have icebergs. Smith slightly alerted the ship's course to head farther south. However, he maintained the ship's speed of some 22 knots. At approximately 9:40 p.m., the Misaba. Oh, okay. Sent a warning of an ice field. The message was never relayed to the Titanic's bridge. At 10:55 p.m., the nearby Leyland liner Californian sent word that it had stopped after becoming surrounded by ice. Phillips, who was handling passengers' message, scolded the Californian for interrupting him. Yeah, definitely. I watched the delete scene. I was like, dude, they're trying to warn you that there's iceberg in the area. Can you read? And I was like, he's in the worst job case ever. Two lookouts, Frederick Flint and Reginald Lee, were stationed in the crow's nest of the Titanic. Oh, so that's what the name is. Their task was made difficult by the fact that the ocean was unusually calm that night because there would be little water breaking at its base. An iceberg would be more difficult to spot. In addition, the crow's nest binoculars were missing. That explains it. At approximately 11:40 p.m., about 400 nautical miles, 740 kilometers south of Newfoundland, Canada, an iceberg was sighted and the bridge was notified. First Officer William Murdoch ordered both the ship, hard on starboard, and maneuver that under the order system then in place would turn the ship to port left, and the engines was reversed. The Titanic began to turn, but it was too close to avoid collision. The ship's starboard side scraped along the iceberg. At least five of its supposedly watertight compartments toward the bow were ruptured. After assessing the damage, Andrews determined, thank you, Mom, that of the ship's forward compartments filled with water, its bow would drop deeper into the ocean, causing water from the reported compartments to spill over into each succeeding compartment, thereby sealing the ship's fate. The Titanic would founder. By reversing the engines, Murdoch actually caused the Titanic to turn slower than if it had been moving at its original speed. Most experts believe the ship would have survived if it had hit the icebergs head on. Smith ordered Phillips to begin sending distress signals, one of which reached the Carpathia to at approximately 12:20 a.m. on April 15, and the Carnage ship immediately headed toward the stricken liner. However, the Carpathia was some 58 natural miles, 107 kilometers away when it received the signal, and it would take more than 3 hours to reach the Titanic. Other ships also responded, including the Olympic, but all were too far away. A vessel was spotted nearby, but the Titanic was unable to contact it. The Californian was also in the vicinity, but his wireless had been turned off for the night. As attempts were made to contact nearby vessels, the lifeboats began to be launched with orders. Just ignore that, guys. Yeah. With orders of women and children first. Although the Titanic's number of lifeboats exceeded that required by the British Board of Trade, its 20 boats could carry only 1,178 people, far short of the total number of the passengers. This problem was exacerbated by lifeboats being launched well below capacity because crewmen worried that the defense would not be able to support the weight of a fully loaded boat. The Titanic had cancelled its scheduled lifeboat drill earlier in the day, and the crew was unaware that the defense had been tested in Belfast. Lifeboat number 7, which was the first to leave the Titanic, held only about 27 people, though it had space for 65. In the end, only 705 people would be rescued in lifeboats. As passengers waited to enter lifeboats, they were entertained by the Titanic's musicians, who intentionally played by the first class lounge before eventually moving to the front to the ship's deck. Sources differ on how long they performed, some reporting that it was until shortly before the ship sank. Speculation also surrounded the last song they performed, likely either Autumn or Nearly My God to Thee. None of the musicians survived the sinking. By 1 a.m., water was seen at the base E deck of the ground staircase. Amid the growing panic, several male passengers tried to board lifeboat number 14, causing fifth officer Harold Lowe to fire his gun 3 times. Around this time, Phillips' distress calls reflected a growing depression, as one noted that the ship cannot last much longer. As the Titanic's bow continued to sink, the stern began to rise out of the water, placing incredible strain on the midsection. At about 2 a.m., the stern's pillars were clearly visible above the water, and the only lifeboats that remained on the ship were 3 collapsible boats. Smith released the crew, saying that it's every man for himself. He was reported last seen in the bridge, and his body was never found. At approximately 2:18 a.m., the lights on the Titanic went out. It then broke in two, with the bow going underwater. Reports later speculated, and it took some 6 minutes for that session, likely traveling at approximately 30 miles, 48 kilometers per hour, which to reach the ocean bottom. The stone momentarily settles back in the water before rising again, eventually becoming vertical. It briefly remained in that position before beginning its final plunge. At 2:20 a.m., the ship foundered as the stern also disappeared beneath the Atlantic. Water pressure allegedly caused that section, which still had air inside, to implode and it sank. Hundreds of passengers and crew went into the icy water, fearful of being swamped. Those in the lifeboats delayed returning to pick up survivors. By the time they were back, almost all the people in the water had died from exposure. In the end, more than 1,500 perished. Aside from the crew, which had about 700 fatalities, third class suffered the greatest loss of approximately 710. Only some 174 survived. Subsequent claims that passengers in Strait were prevented from boarding boats, however, were largely dispelled, given Smith's failure to sound a general alarm. Some of the class passengers did not realize the direness of the situation until it was too late. Many women also refused to leave their husbands and sons, while the difficulty of simply navigating the complex Titanic from the lower levels caused some to reach the top deck after most of the lifeboats had been launched. The Carpathia arrived in the area at approximately 3:30 a.m., more than an hour after the Titanic sank. Lifeboat number 2 was the first to reach the liner. Over the next several hours, the Carpathia picked up all survivors. White Star Chairman Ismay wrote a message to be sent to the White Star Line's office. Deeply regret, advise you, Titanic sank this morning, 50th, after collision iceberg, resulting serious lost life. Further particulars later. At approximately 8:30 a.m., the Californian arrived, having heard the news some 3 hours earlier. Shortly before 9 a.m., the Carpathia headed for New York City, where it arrived to massive crowds on April 18. Although the majority of dead were crew members and third-class passengers, many of the era wealthiest and most prominent. Sorry, guys, I never read that word before. Families lost members. Among them Isidore and Ida Stratus, and John Jacob Astor. In the popular mind, the glamour associated with the ship, its main footage, and its notable passengers magnify the tragedy of its sinking. The legend arose almost immediately about the night's event, those who had died and those who survived. Heroes and heroines, such as American Molly Brown, who helped command a lifeboat, and Captain Arthur Henry Rostron of the Carpathia, were identified and celebrated by the press. Other notably Ismay, who have found space in the lifeboat and survived, were vilified. There was a strong desire to explain the disaster and inquires into the sinking were held in the United States and Great Britain. In the US, investigations, which lasted from April 10 to May 25, 1912, was led by Sen. William Eldon Smith. In all, more than 80 people were interviewed. Notable witnesses included Second Officer Charles Lightoller, the most senior officer to survive. He defended the actions of his superiors, especially Captain Smith's refusal to decrease the ship's speed. Many passengers testified to the general confusion on the ship. A general warning was never sounded, causing a number of passengers and even crew members to be aware of the danger for some time. In it, sorry. In addition, because of schedule, lifeboat drill would never been held. The lowering of the boats was often haphazard. Perhaps the most scrutinized testimony came from the crew of the Californian, who claimed their ship was some 20 nautical miles, 37 kilometers, from the Titanic. Crew members saw a ship, but said it was too small to be the Titanic. They also stated that it was moving and that efforts to contact it by Morse lamp were unsuccessful. After sighting rockets in the distance, the crew informed Captain Stanley Lord, who had retired for the night. Instead of ordering the ship's wireless operator to turn on the radio, Lord instead told the man to continue to use the Morse lamp. By 2 a.m., the nearby ship had reportedly sailed away. In the end, the U.S. investigation faulted the British Board of Trade, to whose laxity of regulation and hasty inspection the world is largely indebted for this awful fatality. Other contributing causes were also noted, including the failure of Captain Smith to slow the Titanic after receiving ice warnings. However, perhaps the strongest criticism was levied at Captain Lord and the Californian. The community found that the ship was nearer the Titanic than the 19 miles reported by her captain, and that her officers and crew saw the distress signals of the Titanic and failed to respond to them in accordance with the dictate of humanity, international usage, and the requirements of law. That's a lot of money. What the fudge? Hold on, guys. I gotta see how many reading I gotta read. Okay. Let's go up. Was it the green one? Alright, it's this one. Sorry, guys. In May 1912, the British inquiry began. It was overseen by the British Board of Trade, the same agency that had been derided by the U.S. investigators for the insufficient lifeboat requirements. The presiding judge was Sir John Charles Bingham. Lord Mersey. Little new evidence was discovered during the 28 days of testimony. The final report stated that the loss of the said ship was due to collision of an iceberg, brought about by the excessive speed at which the ship was being navigated. However, Mersey also stated that he was not able to blame Captain Smith. He was doing only that which other skilled men would have done in the same position. Captain Lord and Californian, however, drew sharp rebuke. The British investigators claimed that the liner was some 510 nautical miles, 9 to 19 kilometers, of the Titanic, and that she might have saved many, if not all, of the lives that were lost. Both the US and British investigation were proposed to Faraday, safely recommissioned, and in 1913 the first international conference for safety of life at sea was called in London. The conference drew up rules requiring that every ship have lifeboat space for each person embarked, that lifeboat drills being held for each voyage because the Californian had not heard the distress signals of the Titanic, that ships maintain a 24-hour radio watch. Their international ice patrol was established to warn ships of icebergs in the North Atlantic shipping lanes. Oh god, that was embarrassing. And to break up ice. The US and British requires did little to end speculation and debate concerning the sinking of the Titanic. Particular focus centered on the Californian supporters of nickname Lordies. I had no idea. Believed that the captain had been unfairly criticized. They held that a third ship, possibly a Samson, a Norwegian boat illegally hunted seals, was between the Leyland liner and the Titanic. The view eventually gained much support. Crew members of the Californian did not hear rockets being fired, though the sound would have been audible if the ship had been within the distance claimed by US and British investigators. In addition, people aboard the Titanic stated that a vessel was headed in their direction, which could not have been Californian, which was stopped at the time. While the true location of the Californian will likely never be conclusively known, many experts believe it was actually about some 20 miles, 37 kilometers away, and would not have reached the Titanic before it sank. However, Lord has continued to draw criticism for his failure to take more action in response to the distress signals. Within days of the Titanic sinking, talk about began to finding the wreck. Given the limits of technology, however, serious attempts were not undertaken until the second half of the 20th century. In August 1985, Robert Ballard, working with the to help me please. Institute Francis D. Wichurchi Poorly Exploration. Oh, there it is. French Research Institute for the Exploration of the Sea. I was like, please be English. Then expedition from aboard the U.S. Navy research ship Shipnar. The quest was partly a means for testing the Argo, a 16-foot 5 meters submersible sled equipped with a remote control camera that could transmit live image to the monitor. The submersible was sent some 13,000 feet, 4,000 meters, to the floor of the Atlantic Ocean, sending video back to the North. On September 1st, 1985, the first underwater image of the Titanic was recorded and its giant boilers were discovered. Later videos show the ship lying upright in two pieces. Where the bow was clearly recognizable, the stern section was severely damaged. Covering the wreckage were rust-colored stalactite-like formations. Scientists later demanded that the rusticles were, as they were named, were created by iron-eating microorganisms, which are consuming the wreck. By 2019, there was a shocking level of detor- deterioration and the number of notable features which, as the captain's bathtub, were gone. The Titanic, located at about, oh my god, 41 uh 41, 43, 57 north, 49, 56, 49 west, bow section, some 13 natural miles, 24 kilometers, from the position given in its distress signals, was explored numerous times by manned and unmanned submersibles. The expedition found no sign of the long gash previously thought to have been ripped in the ship's hull of the iceberg. Scientists instead discovered that the collision's impact have produced a series of thin gash as well as brittle fracture and separation of seams in the adjacent hull plates, thus allowing water to flood in and sink the ship. In subsequent layer examinations of the wreckage, as well as paperwork in the builder's archives, led to speculations that low-quality steel or weak refines have been contrived to the Titanic sinking. The discovery of the Titanic in 1985 began a debate over the retrieval of artifacts. Some believe that the wreckage, the grave more than 1,000 people, should be left undisturbed. Others, however, cite the historical value to rising items from the ocean floor. In 1987, the American company Titanic Ventures Inc., later renamed RMS Titanic Inc., with the assistance of RF what? I don't know what it means. And the U.S. Navy salvaged some 1,800 artifacts, including a pair of glasses, a whiskey ball, and a leather valise. Later that year, a number of the items appeared in the TV movie Return to the Titanic Alive, and the safe from the wreckage was opened on live television. In 1992, the Salvagers Marks Inc. asked the U.S. court to grant it ownership of the wreckage. RMST contested the claim, speaking a legal battle. 2 years later, the U.S. District Court of the Eastern District of Virginia, I think, granted exclusive salvage rights to RMST. In the ensuing years, the company. Sorry, guys, hold on. Yo, stop. Just because you like my unicorn flag doesn't mean you. Sorry, guys. What was I? Oh, yeah. Because of in the ensuing years, the company continued to retrieve artifacts, many of which formed the basis for touring exhibits. In addition, several sites were established for the permanent display of Titanic's item. In 2000, RMST sought to sell artifacts as violation of the salvage terms, although the court rejected the initial proposal. A deal was ultimately approved in 2011. As part of the decision, any sale of Titanic item had to meet certain conditions, which had been created in conjunction with the U.S. Natural, Ocean, and Atmospheric Administration and the U.S. Department of Justice. Items soon went up in auction, and collectors paid huge sums for a piece of maritime history. In the 21st century, Savage's expansion largely stopped. The development was due in part to various efforts to preserve the decayed wreckage, which is littered with debris and suffered damage after being hit by submersibles. Notably, in 2012, the Titanic began to subject to the Convention on the Protection of Underwater Central Hostage 2001. Although the United States did not sign that treaty, it has undertaken its own effort to protect the site. In 1986, it passed the RMS Titanic Memorial Maritime Act, which treated the wreckage as a grave site and sought to regulate activities related to the ship. In 2023, wait a minute. The act was mentioned by the U.S. government in its attempt to hold on RMST expedition to obtain items. In 2024, RMST conducted a mission to the wreckage, its first in some 14 years. However, because of the federal lawsuit, no artifact was retrieved. The company instead took more than 2 million photographs and discovered that part of the boat's railing had collapsed. In addition, a bronze statuette of the goddess Diana, which had been in the first class lounge, was located on the ocean floor. The artifact had not been seen in 1986. In the late 1990s, tourists began visiting the wreckage, and a new industry was launched. Early visitors paid up to $36,000, about $61,450 in 2024, for a seat on a submersible. In the early 2020s, the cost had risen to about $250,000. Whoa. In June 2023, tragedy struck when Titan, an experimental submersible carrying tourists, imploded. During its descent, 5 people were killed, including Stockton Rush, the co-founder of Ocean Gate Expedition, the owner of the submersible. Countless retardation, interpretation, and analyzed the Titanic disaster, transformed the ships into a cultural icon. In addition to being the subject of numerous books, the ship has inspired various movies, notably A Night to Remember, 1958, and James Cameron's blockbuster Titanic, 1997. In addition, there have been a numerous TV projects, including a 2012 miniseries written by Julian Fellows. Several museums dedicated to the liner draw thousands of visitors each year. In 2012, the 100th anniversary of the ship's sinking Titanic Belfast opened on the site of Holland and Wolf's former shipyard, and it became one of the city's most popular tourist attractions. Although the wreck of the Titanic were eventually deteriorate, the famed liner seems likely to fade from the public imagination. Public British luxury liner that was a sister of the Titanic and the Britannic. It was in service from 1911 to 1935. To compete with the Cunard Line for the highly profitable transatlantic passenger trade, the White Star Line decided to create a class liners noticed more for comfort than speed. The first ships ordered were the Olympic and Titanic. The Britannic was added later. The Belfast firm of Highland and Wolff began construction of the Olympic on December 16, 1908, with the laying of the keel. After work finished on the hull and main superstructure, the Olympic was launched on October 20, 1910, at the time of its completion of 1911. The Olympic was perhaps the world's most luxurious liner. It was also the largest, with a length of approximately 882 feet, 269 meters, and a gross tonnage of 45,324. It could carry more than 2,300 passengers. To much fanfare, the Olympic embarked on its maiden voyage on June 14, 1911, traveling from Southampton, England to New York City. The ship was captained by Egerton Smith, who would later helm the Titanic. So there's another captain? I don't know. In September 1911, during its fifth commercial voyage, the Olympic collided with the HMS Hawke near the Isle of Wight, southern England. It was later determined that suction from the Olympic had pulled the Hawke into the ocean liner. Both ships suffered major damage, and the Olympic did not return to surface until November 1911. After the Titanic sank in 1912, the Olympic went underway major safety improvements. In addition to an increase in the number of lifeboats, the ship's double bottom was lengthened, and 5 of its underwater-tight compartments, which feature doors that allows the section to be isolated from each other, were raised from E deck to B deck. The ships resumed to transatlantic crossings in April 1913. Despite the start of World War I in 1914, the liner continued to operate commercial footage, and in October it helped rescue survivors of the HMS Adacurus, I don't know, where it has struck the mine in Tory Island. In 1915, the Olympic was rechristened as a cruise ship. It subsequently made a number of solo Atlantic crossings to ferry Canadian and U.S. troops to Europe. In May 8, 1918, the Olympic sighted a German U-boat near the Isles of Scilly, England, and rammed and sank the empty vessel. The following year, All Reliable, as the liner was nicknamed, ended its military career. It subsequently underwent major renovation before resuming commercial footage in June 1920. Despite competition from larger ships, the Olympic remained a popular vessel, making frequent Atlantic crossings. On May 15, 1934, in a heavy fog, the Olympic struck and sank the Nantucket lightship, a boat that was positioned to mark the shoal near Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Guys, help me read it. I don't know how to pronounce it. 7 of the 11 crewmen aboard the lightship were killed, and Olympic was later blamed for the accident. In April 1935, the Olympic was retired from service. It was later sold for scrapping, and many of the fixtures and fitting was brought and put on display by various establishments. Put on display. Let me try again. It was later sold for scrapping, and many of the fixtures and fitting were bought and put on display by various establishments, notably the White Swan Hotel in Alnwick, Northumberland, England. Is there a Britannic one? You guys, I gotta stop here because I just only read the Titanic and the Olympic. Let me just zoom in. Hello. Okay, so I think I gotta stop here because let's just read the Titanic and the Olympic. So, let me know what you think, and yeah, happy anniversary of the Titanic. So, let me know what your favorite artifact is and of the Titanic. Let me know. Happy anniversary of the Titanic. Wait, I already said that. So, I'm gonna go now. So, see ya. Subscribe. Bye.